The bell rang for the final time, signaling the end of the school year. I watched as my classmates erupted into cheers, tossing their papers into the air and racing towards freedom. Summer was here. But for me, it wasn't the promise of lazy days by the pool or endless video games that had my mind preoccupied. It was the eerie rumor that had been circulating through the hallways for the past few weeks. They called it the last day curse. Supposedly, every year on the last day of school, a student would go missing. Some said it was just an urban legend, a story concocted by seniors to scare the underclassmen. Others swore it was true, recounting tales of friends who vanished without a trace, their lockers eerily left untouched. I had always brushed it off as nonsense, but something about this year felt different. I grabbed my backpack and started towards the door when I noticed a group of my friends huddled together, whispering excitedly. They waved me over, eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Hey, Jack! You heard about the dare, right?" Sarah, the ringleader of our group, asked, her voice barely containing her excitement. I rolled my eyes, but a shiver of curiosity ran down my spine. "What dare?" "Tonight, we're staying in the school after it closes," she said. "To prove the last day curse is just a stupid myth." I hesitated. Spending a night in an empty school was the last thing I wanted to do, especially with that unsettling rumor hanging over our heads. But peer pressure is a powerful force, and I didn't want to be the only one chickening out. "All right," I sighed. "Count me in." As night fell, we snuck back into the school, using the key Sarah had swiped from her janitor uncle. The hallways, usually bustling with life, were now silent and shadowy, the only light coming from the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. We set up camp in the cafeteria, spreading out sleeping bags and snacks. The atmosphere was tense, but we tried to lighten the mood with jokes and ghost stories. As midnight approached, the laughter died down, and an uneasy silence settled over us. "Do you guys hear that?" Tom whispered, breaking the silence. We strained our ears but heard nothing. Just the hum of the vending machines and the occasional creak of the building settling. "You're just trying to scare us," Lisa said, though her voice wavered. "No, really. Listen." This time, we all heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on a door. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the main office. "Let's go check it out," Sarah suggested, grabbing her flashlight. We crept through the darkened hallways, the tapping growing louder with each step. My heart pounded in my chest, every shadow and flicker of light setting my nerves on edge. When we reached the office, the tapping stopped. Sarah pushed open the door, and we stepped inside. The room was empty, papers strewn across the desks as if abandoned in a hurry. "See? Nothing to be scared of," Sarah said, though she didn't sound convinced. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging the room into darkness. We screamed, fumbling for the flashlights in our backpacks. When we finally managed to get them on, we found ourselves alone again, the door now wide open. "This isn't funny, Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "Let's just go back to the cafeteria and stay there until morning." But as we turned to leave, we saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, with long, tangled hair obscuring its face. It didn't move, just stood there, watching us. "Who is that?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I said, grabbing her arm. We ran, not looking back to see if the figure was following us. When we reached the cafeteria, we barricaded the doors with tables and chairs, our breath coming in ragged gasps. "What was that?" Tom asked, his face pale. "I don't know, but I think we should call someone," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "No signal," she muttered, frustration and fear mingling in her voice. "What about you guys?" We all checked our phones. No bars. It was like something was blocking our signal. "Great. Just great," I said, my mind racing. "We need to find another way out of here." We decided to head for the gym, where we knew there was a door that led outside. Moving as quickly and quietly as we could, we made our way through the darkened halls. Every creak and rustle set our nerves on edge, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the figure to be right behind us. When we reached the gym, the door was locked. Sarah fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Finally, the lock clicked open, and we pushed through the door into the cool night air. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As we hurried across the field, the figure appeared again, this time closer. We could see it more clearly now, and my blood ran cold. Its eyes were hollow, dark voids, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. "Run!" I shouted, and we sprinted towards the parking lot. We reached Sarah's car, piling in and locking the doors. She fumbled with the keys, finally getting the engine started. We sped out of the lot, leaving the school and the figure behind. As we drove away, I glanced back one last time. The figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching us. Its smile seemed to widen as we disappeared into the night. The next morning, we gathered at the diner, exhausted and shaken, but relieved to be safe. We recounted our experience, trying to make sense of what had happened. "Do you think it was real?" Tom asked, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. "I don't know," Sarah said. "But I'm not going back to find out." We agreed never to speak of it again, each of us carrying the memory of that night like a dark shadow. The rumor of the last day curse continued to circulate, and every year, another group of students would try to debunk it. But I knew the truth. That night, something had watched us, something not of this world. And though we had escaped, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for the next last day of school. Weeks passed, and summer began to unfold in its usual lazy fashion. I tried to forget about that night, but the memory clung to me like a shadow. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eye, or hear that faint tapping sound just as I was about to fall asleep. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the lingering effects of a terrifying experience. But then, strange things started happening around town. People began to report seeing a tall, thin figure with long hair lurking near the school at night. Pets went missing, and some claimed to hear that same rhythmic tapping at their windows after dark. The story spread, and soon the whole town was on edge. One evening, Sarah called me, her voice trembling with fear. "Jack, I think it's back. I saw it outside my house last night." My heart sank. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered. "I know what I saw. We need to do something." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet up with the group. We gathered at Sarah's house, the tension palpable. Tom, Lisa, and a few others who had been with us that night were there. We shared our experiences, each more unsettling than the last. "We need to go back," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We need to confront it." "Are you crazy?" Tom exclaimed. "We barely got out alive last time." "We can't just ignore it," she insisted. "It's getting stronger. If we don't do something, more people could get hurt." In the end, We all knew she was right. We couldn't let this thing continue to terrorize our town. So, armed with flashlights, a couple of baseball bats, and a vague plan, we headed back to the school. The building loomed ominously in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes staring down at us. We entered through the same door we had used before, the familiar creaks and groans of the old building sending chills down my spine. This time, we went straight to the source of the tapping, the main office. As we approached, the sound started again, louder and more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to move forward. We pushed open the door, and there it was. The figure stood in the center of the room, its hollow eyes fixed on us. The air grew cold, and a sense of dread washed over me. "Why are you here?" Sarah demanded, her voice wavering but determined. The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, it spoke. "To feed." The word sent a chill down my spine. We had to get out, now. But before I could move, the figure lunged at us, its movements unnaturally fast. We scattered, swinging our makeshift weapons wildly. The figure seemed to flicker in and out of existence, making it impossible to land a solid hit. It was like fighting a shadow. In the chaos, I saw Sarah fall, the figure looming over her. Without thinking, I charged, swinging my bat with all my might. The bat passed through the figure, hitting the floor with a resounding crack. Desperation took over. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her to her feet. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted for the door. We burst out into the hallway, the others close behind. The figure was right on our heels, its hollow eyes burning with an unearthly light. We made it to the gym, slamming the door shut behind us. But I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Up there. Tom pointed to the bleachers. We scrambled up, hoping to put some distance between us and the figure. From our vantage point, we watched as the door shuddered and then burst open. The figure entered, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring our fear. "What do we do?" Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't have an answer. We were trapped, and the figure was getting closer. But then, I noticed something. A faint glow coming from the stage area at the far end of the gym. It looked like a door, one I hadn't seen before. "Over there." I pointed, and we made a mad dash for the stage. The door was small, almost hidden, but it opened easily. We slipped through, finding ourselves in a narrow corridor. The glow grew brighter as we moved forward, illuminating strange symbols carved into the walls. "This place is creepy," Tom muttered, but we kept moving. The corridor ended in a small room, filled with old books and strange artifacts. In the center of the room was a large, ancient-looking mirror. The glow was coming from within it, a swirling, otherworldly light. "Do you think it's a way out?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Sarah said. "But it's our only chance." We gathered around the mirror, its surface rippling like water. As the figure entered the room, I took a deep breath and reached out, touching the glass. It was cold, sending a shock through my body. "Together," I said, and we all placed our hands on the mirror. The light intensified, enveloping us. The last thing I saw was the figure lunging towards us, its hollow eyes wide with rage. When I opened my eyes, we were outside, standing in the school parking lot. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, bathing everything in a soft, golden light. The figure was nowhere to be seen. We stood in silence, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We did it. We beat it." I nodded, though a part of me still felt uneasy. We had escaped, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. The last day curse was real, and we had faced it and survived. As we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That the figure was still out there, waiting. But for now, we were safe. And that was enough. Summer passed, and the new school year began. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after what we had experienced. The rumor of the last day curse persisted, but we knew the truth. And as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, I couldn't help but wonder. When the last day of school came again, would it return? And if it did, would we be ready to face it once more? Only time would tell. As I stepped through the rusted gates of St. Agnes High School, a shiver ran down my spine. It was the last day of school, but it felt like anything but a celebration. The air was heavy with an eerie stillness, as if the school itself held its breath, anticipating something sinister. I walked through the deserted hallways, the echoes of my footsteps bouncing off the peeling walls. Lockers stood open, their contents scattered haphazardly as if abandoned in a hurry. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by an unsettling silence that hung in the air like a dense fog. I made my way to the classroom, my heart pounding in my chest with each step. The door creaked open, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. Desks were overturned, papers strewn across the floor, and the once pristine chalkboard was now marred with cryptic symbols. I hesitated at the threshold, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. With a trembling hand, I stepped into the room, the door slamming shut behind me with a deafening bang. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, sending a chill through my bones. I could see my breath crystallizing in the frigid air as I scanned the room for any sign of life. That's when I saw her, a figure huddled in the far corner, her back turned towards me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I took a cautious step forward, my heart pounding in my ears. As I drew closer, I could make out the faint sound of sobbing. My instincts told me to run, to flee from whatever darkness lurked in that room, but something compelled me to stay. "Are you okay?" I asked again, my voice trembling with fear. The figure slowly turned around, revealing a face twisted in anguish. Her eyes were hollow sockets, devoid of any life, and her skin was ashen and clammy. I stumbled backward, my mind unable to comprehend the horror before me. This wasn't possible, it couldn't be real. But as the figure lurched towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, I knew that I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls as I fled from the terror that pursued me. But no matter how fast I ran, it was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim me as its next victim. I reached the exit, my heart pounding in my chest as I flung open the door and burst out into the blinding sunlight. But as I stepped outside, I realized that the nightmare was far from over. The schoolyard was deserted, the playground equipment standing empty and forlorn. In the distance, I could see the outline of the school building against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with an otherworldly light. And then I heard it, a low, guttural moan that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath my feet. I turned and ran, knowing that I would never be able to escape the horrors that lurked within those walls. As I fled into the unknown, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to St. Agnes High School on that fateful day. But deep down, I knew that some mysteries were better left unsolved, for to dwell too long on the darkness was to invite it in, and I feared that I would never find my way back to the light again. The final bell tolled, a somber echo through the empty corridors of St. Agnes High School. It was the last day of the school year, and a bittersweet atmosphere lingered in the air, a mixture of excitement for summer break and the melancholy of farewells. As I gathered my books and belongings from my desk, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach, like a whisper of warning from the shadows. The classroom was silent, the usual buzz of activity replaced by an eerie stillness. The desks stood empty, their surfaces clear of the usual clutter of papers and textbooks. The walls, once adorned with colorful posters and student artwork, seemed to close in on me, their peeling paint and faded decorations casting a sense of desolation over the room. I glanced out the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty schoolyard. It was as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the school and its secrets behind. With a heavy sigh, I slung my backpack over my shoulder and made my way into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow that seemed to distort the shadows, turning them into twisted caricatures of the objects they mimicked. I quickened my pace, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to suffocate me. But as I turned the corner, I froze in horror. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the dim light. It stood perfectly still, its gaze fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to scream, to alert someone, anyone, to the looming threat, but my voice caught in my throat. I was paralyzed by fear, rooted to the spot as the figure began to advance towards me, its movements slow and deliberate. Desperate to escape, I turned and fled in the opposite direction, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of terror. I could hear the sound of my own ragged breaths echoing in my ears, a symphony of fear that drowned out all other noise. I raced down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floor like the pounding of a distant drum. But no matter how fast I ran, the figure was always there, looming just behind me, its presence a constant reminder of the terror that pursued me. I reached the stairs and bounded down them two at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I burst through the doors and into the sunlight, relief flooding through me as I emerged into the safety of the outside world. But as I turned to look back at the school, my heart sank. The building loomed ominously before me, its windows dark and foreboding. And standing in the doorway was the figure, its shadowy form silhouetted against the fading light. I knew then that I would never truly be free of the horrors that lurked within the walls of that school. And as I turned and walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what other terrors lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to claim their next victim. As I walked home, the events of that last day of school replayed in my mind like a nightmare on a loop. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin, but it was no use. The memory of the figure in the hallway haunted me, its presence a constant reminder that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself unable to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent a shiver down my spine. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of the figure and what it could possibly want from me. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I slipped into a fitful sleep plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispered secrets. When I awoke the next morning, I felt drained, as if I had run a marathon in my sleep. But despite my exhaustion, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the sense of unease followed me like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything I did. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of that last day of school began to fade, replaced by the distractions of summer vacation. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, the feeling of dread lingered, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of my consciousness. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible above the sound of my own heartbeat. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the room like a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. I tried to block it out, to bury it beneath the covers and pretend it wasn't real, but it was no use. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that the figure from that last day of school had followed me home, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of my reality. And as I lay there, paralyzed by fear, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to claim their next victim. The sun was setting on the last day of school, casting long shadows across the empty hallways of Jefferson High. It was a day of mixed emotions, as students eagerly anticipated the freedom of summer while also bidding farewell to another year of their academic journey. As I packed my bag, ready to leave the classroom behind for the next few months, a sense of apprehension gnawed at the edges of my excitement. The classroom was silent, devoid of the usual hum of activity. The desks stood empty, their surfaces cleared of textbooks and papers. The walls, once adorned with colorful displays of student work, now seemed to close in on me, suffocating in their emptiness. I glanced out the window, where the orange hues of twilight painted the sky. But even the beauty of the setting sun couldn't dispel the unease that lingered in the air like a thick fog. As I made my way into the hallway, the fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I shivered involuntarily, a chill creeping up my spine. The school, once vibrant with the energy of its students, now felt like a tomb, filled with the echoes of past laughter and the whispers of forgotten secrets. I quickened my pace, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to weigh me down. But as I turned the corner, I came to an abrupt halt. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure, cloaked in darkness. It was tall and slender, its features obscured by the dim light. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that it was facing away from me, its attention focused on something unseen. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should I approach the figure? Ignore it and continue on my way? Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to flee from whatever darkness lurked in the shadows. But curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I began to approach. With each step, the figure seemed to grow taller, looming larger in my field of vision. The air around me grew colder, sending shivers down my spine. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, a steady rhythm of fear that drowned out all other noise. As I drew closer, I realized that the figure was not alone. Standing beside it was another figure, smaller and more delicate, its presence almost ethereal in the dim light. It seemed to glow softly, like a beacon in the darkness. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. There was something undeniably otherworldly about the scene before me, something that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. And then, without warning, the figures turned to face me. I recoiled in horror as their faces came into view, twisted and contorted into grotesque masks of agony. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, burning with an intensity that seared through me like a blade. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. This was wrong, all wrong. I needed to get out of here, to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to run, I found my path blocked by another figure, this one larger and more menacing than the rest. It loomed over me, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my lips. I was trapped, surrounded on all sides by the darkness that threatened to consume me. And then, with a suddenness that took my breath away, the figures lunged forward, their movements jerky and unnatural. I could feel their icy touch closing in around me, suffocating in its intensity. In that moment of terror, I knew that I was lost. There was no escaping the darkness that lurked within the walls of Jefferson High, no escaping the horrors that awaited me in the shadows. And as the darkness closed in around me, swallowing me whole, I couldn't help but wonder what twisted fate had brought me to this place, on this final day of school. But deep down, I knew that some questions were better left unanswered, some mysteries better left unsolved. For in the darkness that surrounded me, there was only fear, and the knowledge that I would never escape its grasp. The final bell chimed, resonating through the empty corridors of Grayson High School. Excited chatter filled the air as students hurriedly gathered their belongings, eager to embrace the freedom of summer vacation. Yet, amidst the anticipation, a subtle sense of foreboding lingered in the air, like a shadow cast by unseen forces. As I gathered my books and packed my bag, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. The classroom, once bustling with the energy of learning, now stood silent and still, its walls adorned with remnants of the academic year gone by. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, adding to the eerie ambience that permeated the room. I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness of the corners, but the space remained empty, save for the echoes of distant footsteps in the hallway. With a final sigh, I zipped up my bag and made my way out into the deserted corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, artificial glow that seemed to distort the shadows, giving them a life of their own. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every move. I quickened my pace, eager to leave the confines of the school behind and escape into the warmth of the summer sun. But as I rounded a corner, a peculiar sight caught my eye, a door, slightly ajar, at the far end of the hallway. A faint light flickered from within, casting strange, dancing shadows onto the walls. Intrigued and apprehensive in equal measure, I approached the door cautiously. With a hesitant push, it swung open, revealing a sight that chilled me to the bone. The classroom beyond was unlike any I had ever seen. The walls were adorned with intricate symbols and sigils, drawn in what appeared to be blood-red paint. Candles flickered on every surface, casting a dim, flickering light that danced across the room like spectral flames. My heart raced as I stepped into the room, my senses on high alert. The air felt heavy, charged with an otherworldly energy that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced around, searching for any sign of life, but the room remained eerily still, save for the soft whisper of the candles and the faint rustle of paper in the breeze. And then, at the front of the room, I saw her, a figure cloaked in shadow, her back turned towards me as she faced the chalkboard. Her long hair hung in tangled strands around her shoulders, and she wore a tattered dress that seemed to blend seamlessly with the darkness of the room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. The figure turned slowly, her movements stiff and unnatural. As her eyes met mine, a chill ran down my spine. They were empty, devoid of any life or emotion. I took a step back, my mind reeling with confusion and fear. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to get out of here, to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to run, I realized with a sinking feeling in my gut that the door had vanished, leaving only a blank wall in its place. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for another way out, but there was none to be found. I was trapped, alone in this nightmare of a classroom with no way out. As the figure advanced towards me, her movements slow and deliberate, I realized with growing horror that I was not alone. There was something else in this room with us, something dark and malevolent that hungered for my soul. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. It was just a dream, a nightmare from which I would soon wake up. But deep down, I knew that this was no dream. This was real, and the horrors that lurked within this forgotten classroom were all too terrifyingly real. And as the darkness closed in around me, swallowing me whole, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought me to this place, on this final day of school. But in the end, it didn't matter. For in this forgotten classroom, there was only fear, and the knowledge that I would never escape its grasp. Thanks for tuning into Soul Whisper. If you got chills from today's story, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your fellow horror enthusiasts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest stories. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the horror alive on this channel. Until next time, stay spooky and keep the lights on.